Welcome to Abundance. You guessed it, a podcast dedicated to all things surrounding dance. I am Kristen.
And I am Hannah, and we are two best friends who are brought together by this art form.
Please join us in 5, 6, 7, 8. Hi everyone, we're back today for yet another interview, and I'm really excited for today's guest and to learn more about him.
Yeah, so today we have Mr. Michael Job with us, who's an incredible person and artist. I had the pleasure of getting to know him when I was a little girl, and now we get to hear even more about him today. So I'm really excited. He had quite the extensive career. And Michael, can you tell us a little bit about how you got into dancing and how that prospered?
Sure. Hi, Hannah, Kristen, thank you so much for having me on. Give me a little chance to tell part of my story. How I started, I was fortunate in a million ways to be where I was and just follow the path that I found myself on. But I grew up in an unusual town, which was a science town, a government town. It was a location of the densest population of PhD and nuclear science intelligentsia in the world. And therefore they had a symphony, they had a playhouse, and they had an outstanding civic ballet. And a group of those citizens brought one of the finest teachers that they could find. She was one of the founding faculty members of the Nutmeg Conservatory, which you might be familiar with, Joan Kunch.
Yes, I know her. That was my first summer intensive as a child.
How wonderful. She was my first ballet teacher. Oh. So you can imagine, how well equipped I was from the very beginning.
Yeah, she's amazing.
She was amazing. And so this little group in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, produced full-length ballets, and they would bring in international figures. Georges Salavisa staged our Coppelia and danced with us. He was a principal of the English National Ballet. David and Anna Marie Holmes would come frequently, and these are internationally known guest stars. Anna Marie Holmes became the director of the Boston Ballet and stages ballets all over the world. Those were my first teachers. So I just had an outstanding opportunity at the beginning. I was 14, 15 years old, my very first lessons. And I went off in the summer and had summer experiences at Southwest Ballet Center with Bill Martin Viscount, and also his outstanding international faculty of major ballet stars. Just that's how it started for me. I was in high school in a place that was very supportive of this unusual thing I was doing, and had opportunity to join the Pittsburgh Ballet Theater at 17 years old. So I left after my junior year of high school, did a couple of correspondence courses to get my diploma. I also had support from that high school and the counseling centers there, and they were like, go. And so I joined the Pittsburgh Ballet Theater. I joined a touring ballet company in what would have been my senior year of high school.
Amazing.
And in that place, one of my first ballet lessons was with Frederick Franklin, who was the co-director and who performed with us. We learned Gaieté Parisienne from Leonid Massine, who, again, these are legendary historical figures in the ballet world. And that very first year, I think we danced 5 full-length ballets: Giselle, Romeo and Juliet, full-length Swan Lake, Nutcracker. We did a mixed rep with Gaieté Parisienne and some other dances. It was just phenomenal kind of opportunity. I was a sponge. I'd only been training for 2.5 years. and I was a sponge, and I watched and learned everything that I could see. If anyone in any cast, any of the male dancers was missing or sick or injured, they would say, "Where's Job?" and stick me in there. And that's happened a couple of times in performance where I got to dance a principal role with the ballerina because I knew it. And in a tight squeeze, somebody dropped out before a curtain went up and they would throw me in. So that was that kind of early experience. We saw a very interesting article in a dance magazine about the Houston Ballet, and I learned about a young contemporary choreographer named James Clouser, who was down there and had taken the interim director, and they were in the midst of changing directors. And I just was intrigued by him, and we auditioned for him on tour when we were traveling in Texas. Several of the dancers kind of snuck off and went over to them, and this guy was. I had long hair and a beard. It was just very different from anybody. He was informal, very different from anybody of the intimidating figures that I had all, associated with choreographers and teachers and directors. And it's very personable. And after I did the audition, he said, "Michael, if you want to dance in this company, I'd love to have you dance in this company." It's very flattering for me at that time. And I accepted that position. I went to Houston. And it just, like I said, there's good and bad and the ugly in the story of a career. I was under contract with major ballet organizations for 24 years nonstop. And that was just the very beginning. And this was in the mid-1970s, when the Houston Ballet, for instance, which now resides in a $50 million mega complex, rehearsed in one studio, and you had to get out of the studio for school classes to come in at 4:00 and then come back later in the evening for more rehearsals after the children had left. There was one studio. Later moving to Atlanta, it was a similar. The Atlanta Ballet at the time was housed in a converted parking garage. It wasn't the way it is now. Our facilities were very poor. It was really normal to have obstacles in the room, pipes overhead, and architectural elements in the middle of the room holding the ceiling up, and this kind of thing. It was just a different day and time. Mm-hmm. Houston Ballet changed directors. It was a trauma. There were 23 dancers in the company that I was in, with a very popular director, and we loved him and we wanted to continue working with him. And that board of directors decided to change directors, and he was just out. And out of those 23 dancers, 18 of those dancers were released. And the new director kept 5. And I was one of those 5, and I stayed a year with the new director. I didn't care for that situation. And I left and I went to Amsterdam, and I joined the Dutch National Ballet. I auditioned for them in an open audition in New York City with over 300 people in attendance. They accepted 2 American dancers. One of whom is on their faculty of their school still.
Wow.
Off to Amsterdam, 21 years old, with $50 in my pocket, backpack. And enjoyed that experience tremendously. I was there, I think, for a little over 2 years, 2.5 years. And from Amsterdam, came back, bounced around a little bit. We wound up in Dallas with George Skabeen, who was also someone very lovely, very sweet and wonderful. He was a former director of the Paris Opera Ballet. He was one of the, I believe, the original director of the Harkness Ballet. And he was married to Marjorie Tallchief, sister of Maria Tallchief. And she was an étoile of the Paris Opera, star of the Paris Opera. So these, luminary people, when they said, And he would say, Michael, I think I will make you principal dancer. And you go, just very flattering. Okay, I will come to Dallas. I'll come to Dallas. Off to Dallas we go. And had a wonderful time with them. And very sadly, Mr. Skabeen passed away within a year and a half. And again, a new director came in, wasn't in tune with that director, and so off I went auditioning, and I went to Atlanta, and I was hired in Atlanta as principal dancer. This is the first contract. No, I think, the Dallas did not list dancers as principal dancers, but in Atlanta, this was the first contract where I was listed as a principal dancer. Atlanta was 4 years with Robert Barnett, also an angelic figure, just a most wonderful, kind, loving, and this kind of like what I needed or wanted. I wanted someone who was kind, and that was not true often in many companies. You heard about, in the middle 1970s, there was Boston Ballet, Ballet West, Atlanta Ballet, Chicago Ballet was still sort of forming. There was the Joffrey and the NABT and New York City Ballet in New York. And there really weren't, San Francisco, there really weren't other places where you could get paid to dance in a ballet company. There weren't that many. They hadn't formed or developed yet in Miami and Cleveland and, on and on and on. They weren't around. So your choices were kind of limited, and you knew everybody, and people talked, and you knew what situations were like. So you hear, oh, Atlanta's really nice. So off it went.
Yeah. Sorry.
That's quite all right. You can.
No, I was just going to say, so it sounds like a lot of it has to do with the people you know and networking. And I feel like that's still true today.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
My summer sessions, which I went to religiously to the same school and the same teacher every summer, and 4 or 5 summers in a row. And then after 4 or 5 summers there, I began teaching there. So there were 100 to 120 students there. And the same thing was true. The whole summer intensive, those didn't exist. This is very much a later development that everybody has summer intensives. That wasn't true. You could do a summer course at North Carolina School of the Arts. Harkness did a summer course. Joffrey did a summer course. San Francisco did a summer course. And that was all pretty much the known things that you could study in the summer, those kind of intensives. Our summer sessions were 8 weeks. They were mind-boggling workload of what you would do. We took 5 classes every day, and then rehearsed full-length ballets and did 2 full performances at the end of that 8-week session with international guest stars, with Violette Verdi, with Ann Burton, with, he would bring in Susana Benavides, who was the prima ballerina of the National Ballet of Mexico, Diane Bell, who was Royal Winnipeg. They would bring in top dancers for you to have that experience. Right? So now a 2 or 3 week summer session, summer intensive doesn't seem intensive to me. It wasn't that big. But the point I was making was that out of those 100 students, 30, 40 of them had careers. And they were principals, and they were soloists, and so yes, I knew dancers in Atlanta. I knew dancers in Chicago. I knew dancers pretty much all around, and that's how I knew Tawna. We didn't dance together, but we were, contemporaries, and spoke to each other when they began the dance stores thing. I was chatting with them and bouncing that idea back and forth around with them. I think Tawna and I met, we were slated to do a ballet competition together. she was looking for a partner. Someone dropped my name, and we were having conversations about getting that organized. And I think one reason or another that was too challenging for us, and we didn't pull it together. But that was how we initially met.
Yeah, so a quick little fun fact, Tana Hunter just retired from Mercyhurst University as the chair of our department, but the whole reason why I knew about Mercyhurst and what got me to audition is Michael Job here. So I'm so grateful for his advice, and it's such a small world. Yeah, like he knows Tana, and Tana was such an amazing teacher for me and Kristen. So thank you, Michael.
My pleasure. But yeah, it was a smaller world.
Yeah.
No.
It definitely seems that way.
In those days.
Would you say that those summer programs that you're speaking of were kind of a little bit more reserved for like the more elite dancers, those that were gonna be?
Yes, you had to beg, borrow, and steal. You had to audition to get in, and for a young man, not so much.
Right.
And for obvious reasons,
Right.
they wanted them, they needed them, they had partnering to do. There would be 10 or 12 or 14 young men at these summer sessions, and we all had amazing growth experiences. This was a thing, that intense period. You would come out a year or two advanced in your training. It was like spending a year in an ordinary school. You would really get so much out of it.
Wow. And now I'm curious, if you don't mind sharing, I know that this can be a little bit more personal for some people, but you spoke of during your high school period that people were very supportive of your career and pursuing dance. Is that kind of how it was throughout the rest of your career, your childhood, or did you ever experience some of the kind of stereotypical bullying we hear of in terms of being a male dancer, or at least witness that upon other dancers experiencing that?
I didn't so much experience it. It was kind of obvious, like that went on. It was also obvious to me that where I was kind of safe. I was very public in my little town. I was mentioned in the paper. My photos were in the paper. We did a production of Fiddler on the Roof, and I played a role and danced in that. And everybody goes to see. And our ballet performances were very well attended and publicized. And I was written up in my high school newspaper. And it was, I was doing something unusual, but it wasn't looked down upon. I choreographed Guys and Dolls for the high school musical, and I got a bunch of football players, along with the standard issue musical theater folks.
That's wonderful.
To be in the cast and to do those dances, and I taught those dances to the guys, and we did it in the high school assembly, so it was really, I was really out there doing it. And so I think people were
sounds like you received a lot of respect.
Yeah, I was dealt with respectfully.
And that's really wonderful to hear, especially now, because you hear, younger men who are in the arts that do get bullied and things like that. It's nice to hear that you didn't have that kind of experience.
That really wasn't my experience. More so what I would confront quite often was the kind of thing, well, what do you really do? And what do you do for a living? And
we still get that a little now ourselves.
Yeah. And what are you going to do, in parentheses, like when you grow up?
Yep.
And, so I got the last laugh, and that, like I said, I was under contract with major ballet organizations for the next 24 years until I decided that I kind of had enough for a while, and I wanted to do something different. So yeah, I didn't have that kind of experience so much.
That's great to hear. Yeah.
Yeah, and so Michael, you kind of touched upon this earlier, but out of the many renowned companies you've worked for, Boston Ballet, Dallas Ballet, Dutch National Ballet, Houston Ballet, Pittsburgh Ballet Theater, Hubbard Street Dance Company, and Joffrey too, which one was your favorite to dance for and why?
Mm,
Have one?
that is a that is a hard one, because at any of these places, I think about wonderful people at any of them that I worked with, you know. And some experiences were not wonderful, and some uh, people that were in authority over you were not wonderful. But for the most part, my experience in ballet companies, contrary to any movie or contemporary television series or anything that I see out, which are mostly bogus nonsense, were with really sweet people who loved what they were doing, who supported one another with great, kindness. At the same time, being competitive. It's always competitive. The guy who's getting the roll up from you, you want to beat him, and so it's there's that. um
Right. It's kind of a fine line, right? You develop these really strong friendships and relationships with people within the field and within your companies or where you're studying. But like you said, at the end of the day, you're all kind of vying for the same thing and wanting the same spots, the same roles.
sure, sure. My experience in the Netherlands with the Dutch National was really extraordinary. To be in a national ballet in a capital city of an artistic center like Amsterdam. And Amsterdam, the National Ballet, when I was there, probably had 90 dancers, and they were from all over the world, countries all over the world. There weren't certainly 90 Dutch dancers, taking the jobs of the Dutch National Ballet. They were French, they were English, they were Israeli, they were Finnish, they were quite a few Americans, and maybe a third, maybe a little more of the company were Dutch. So to be in that environment and really get some perspective of folks who, again, were doing pliés and tendus with you every day, and doing repertory, and by the way, doing in that company 160 performances a year.
Wow.
Right? Busy.
A lot. Very busy.
Busy. You get up in the morning, you had company class, you rehearsed, you got on a bus typically and went to a smaller city and performed, or you were at home and you performed. It was a kind of non-stop, but always exciting. Always exciting. But so many friends from there, and so many friends from Atlanta, and so many friends from Chicago, and so many friends, just really dear. Boston, and hard to pick a favorite. And I could tell you, what director was a jerk, and who did this and who did that. But I kind of pushed that out of my mind. And I'll tell you a funny story. I took a long break from dancing, teaching in the studio, and I had a small construction company for 10 years. And towards the end of that period, came the phenomenon of Facebook. And during that 10 years, I had really kind of said, I just want to do something else. I'm not think about it. I don't look at dance on TV. I don't get dance magazine. I'm not, I'm not looking this up online. I really took a long break from it. And then came Facebook. And I joined Facebook. And I didn't really know what I was getting into. But within a week, or maybe less, I was in contact with like 80 colleagues and friends from all of these places, all at once, saying, Michael Job, where are you? What are you doing? How have you been? And it just kind of flooded back of that, that journey, that long journey, and how precious those relationships were, and how you shared something that now was ever more precious to you as the years have gone by, and it may not have felt that way at that time, how precious those to be in that company at that time when those things were happening and these ballets were produced and this person was teaching and
It's really special to have so many, like you said, of these connections and these relationships from all around the world and diverse backgrounds. It's really,
I mean, there was the tough part that when you wanted or needed to leave, you would leave them. You left all those relationships, but and we didn't have these social networks to keep up with people. But yeah, then it all kind of came back, and I have a great deal of fun now, still in contact, and I'm talking about relationships that were 30 years ago and 40 years ago, but it feels like, oh, that person really deep inside because you worked with them and you danced with them or you partnered with them, and it can be it's very, very special set of old friends,
Wonderful. Now, I'm curious a little bit more, Michael, if you don't mind sharing. Hannah actually had mentioned to me about your construction work prior to our interview today, and we want to just know a little bit more if, like you said, that was kind of you taking a break for a bit from dance, but did you actually find that your career in dance helped you in any way in that kind of very different field? I know we always talk about in dance how there's many transferable skills and how it just really produces a very disciplined or well-rounded individual. So I don't know if you experienced any of that in your little career shift at that time.
It's so funny. What I did was I became frustrated that so many teaching jobs were so flimsy and insecure and paid poorly. And I became frustrated that I found myself moving too often at the mid stages of my life, and like in my 40s. And I really, at a certain point, kind of got mad about it. I'd been to this school and then been to that school and I'd been to this school and this job flaked out and that job flaked out and I have to start over. And so I'd had a little experience in between these situations where I'd have like a few months and I had to regroup and I had to find another position. And I had a friend and he had a construction company and he always had an apartment available because his dad owned a lot of apartments. And so it was just like a place I could go and refuge and make a little money and regroup and redirect. And I did that 2 or 3 times. And again, a wonderful friend that I'd met when I was very, very young who kind of understood my deal. And long story short, he had a company that built playground equipment, and I had a couple opportunities to install and build a playground somewhere. And I'm like, this is really kind of fun with the kids all around. They're excited about what you're doing, and you're doing something that has a little a particular kind of meaning. And so I became a playground safety inspector, and which gives you the authority to install playgrounds on a commercial basis for companies that sell the equipment. And I formed this company. I immediately went to work, and I spent 10 years doing this. I was not married at the time, and this enabled me to do something which I had never been able to do as a dancer or a teacher, which is buy a house and get a dog. And I could never do that. And I did those two, and I always wanted to do that. I do those two things. I bought a house in the foothills of the Smoky Mountains in a beautiful spot all by myself in a little farmhouse, and I got a golden retriever. I got a truck, and I bought some equipment, and we started traveling. Long story short, I built over 400 playgrounds in 36 states in those 10 years. And what that enabled me to do was make money, which I had never done, and spend time alone and ponder what I had done. And in a certain regard, why it hadn't played out for me, because it kind of hadn't, it kind of hadn't. And just to do something alone and to be successful at it. And so that was restorative for me after a peripatetic career, a career where I moved a lot and didn't have those roots. I didn't dig roots in. So I did have that experience. And so somewhere near you, there's a playground that I built with swings on it that 1,000 kids swing on every day. And that's just something that I have in my background that, I felt good about. I felt good about doing. And then, like I said, came Facebook. And Facebook messed that up. It brought that whole background back up to the foreground, just in my head. And it didn't take long. Well, it was the horrible recession that we went through in 2007, 2008 also put that business to rest, because that money dried up. And I was standing there with all this equipment and all this junk and nowhere to go. And so I just have bailed out of that business sort of just in time.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, no, it's very interesting. Like you said, I mean, we can just get so wrapped up in our careers sometimes, and dance is just this never ending thing. There's kind of no rest period, and from one job to the other, one location, new home to the other. So It's just very interesting to hear about your illustrious career, but then that shift and how it fulfilled other needs and desires and kind of a little change of pace of things. Yeah. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, and then Facebook allowed you to get connected with the dance world again, and here you are.
It did. Good. And just to get back and dive into the classroom, and it's funny, when we moved back to Greensboro, my wife and I, after we were married, and I still hadn't taught. I hadn't taught a class. I hadn't set foot in a studio for 11 years, and there was a nice group here, and a very knowledgeable woman who trained in a university in Moscow, and she had a school here in town, and I just wrote to her and I said, I was a dancer, and these are the places that I danced, and I used to really enjoy teaching, and do you think I could come in and teach a class? And I was really just kind of stepping out because I hadn't done this in a long time. I hadn't used the terminology in a long time.
Yeah.
And I just came in and I began to teach for her. And it really was like landing in a foreign country and realizing that you spoke that language after a 10 or 11 year break. And that it was all right on the tip of your tongue, all the terminology, all the corrections you ever heard, all of the, all of the emphasis that you personally want to put, forward. And so just dove back into teaching. And then I did the same thing at the University of North Carolina, Greensboro here, where I just dropped a note to the director and said, I had a career and I enjoyed teaching. And I always said, I'll teach a class for free. That's I would love to come in and I'll teach a class for free just to say hi. And so I taught one class there and I was immediately engaged and so I've spent the from 2015 on the faculty of the University of North Carolina here.
Very
So,
nice.
yeah, that's amazing. So how old were you then when you started teaching? You're probably a bit older, right? In your 30s, maybe?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I taught it. I would go home to Oak Ridge and teach in the home studio when I was, when I was younger, early 20s or whatever. But no, kind of in our day, um, dancers were here and teachers were up there, and you didn't consider yourself a teacher. In fact, when I was in Boston and I was nearing sort of the end of my dancing career, I could tell. I was 32, 33, and things were breaking. And I went to the director and I said, I would really like to do some rehearsals or teach in the school, or my ambition was to be a ballet master. And he said, Michael, they won't let you do that. Meaning the dancers in the company. They won't let you make that jump right here in front of them.
Interesting.
And I think he was correct that it would have been very hard, very hard for me to do that. I had a similar experience when I went from there, and I went to teach in the Washington School of Ballet in Washington, D.C. And I taught company classes every day. And boy, I got attitude from those people. Whoa, they were not having it. And I didn't really understand why. And it was very hard. I taught in the school, all the upper levels. It was all wonderful. Taught. And I would teach these company classes and I get these kind of cold looks. And they did not want me to become a ballet master there. They had one of their own. They had their own favorite in the midst of their group that they were going to that they hoped to move into that position. So I was just kind of locked out. And I didn't know why. And it was just, I was a peer. I just left my dancing career a year or two or three earlier, and I wasn't. I didn't have the gravitas, quite yet. So difficult, but that was what I think that the director in Boston was letting me in on. Like, you're gonna need to do that somewhere else.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I never, it never really occurred to me that could happen, but it makes, like I said, just complete sense if you were just a dancer and then you had to then change your rank almost into that teacher role, how that could be a little uncomfortable for, yeah. Interesting.
For everybody.
Yeah. Do you teach or have you taught children at a young age, or is it mostly just adults?
I have, and I don't specialize in it.
Yeah.
And I don't think I have been asked to do it, and I don't think that you want to have a 60-something-year-old man with gray hair teaching little girls.
Uh-huh. No, it's fair. Completely fair.
Mm-hmm. I don't think that that's appropriate for them.
Mm-hmm.
They need the sweetness and they need the sort of all embracing introduction, and that's not what I'm going to be able to do for them.
Right.
But give them to me when they're 12.
Yeah.
And we'll get going. And then they're ready to kind of take it,
right,
and get pushed and
they're more disciplined.
Get feedback and they're into it. They're into it. They're ready to listen. If you say you got to straighten your knees and you got to point your feet, I mean, you really have to.
Right. No, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing. Um, is there a preferred age range that you like to teach? Like, would you rather teach adults or would you like to teach those 12-year-olds? Like professional dancers versus not?
I have really enjoyed teaching at the university level.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you're dealing with a young adult. And my experience there has been from a young person who has had no exposure or very bad exposure. In fact, that's very common. Very bad exposures. Um, to really what I would call beautiful finished ballet dancer, also in that program, often in the same class. You know, it's this huge broad range you might be dealing with in a given classroom, because I don't rank them, I don't get to place them. They just show up and I deal with what I'm looking at. But I really have enjoyed that because you can, you're not imposing it on them. They don't want instruction imposed on them. They want to understand what you know.
They're there because they want to learn. Like they're choosing to be there.
They are, and they are for the most part very eager. Some more than others. It's a required course as well. You know, they may or may not be completely into it, but hopefully after a few weeks they are. And I have had really, really good success in taking a disparate group and teaching them port de bras, you know, being consistent and getting some unification of idea about the shapes and the forms and positions and terms. And you know, and I'm able to explain that a term can be used in one method and not used in another. And this is, you know, in Russian they'll say this, in Denmark they'll say this, and in New York City Ballet they might show it this way, and explain how and why and what, and then say, and this is how I do it, or this is from all I have gleaned what I think is best. And you know, give them some sense that things may be different from place to place, but what's, you know, kind of what's important, and wherever you wind up, if you wind up working for someone, is what it is that they want, that person, what that person wants, and to, you know, to like go with it. Don't, you know, don't reject it because something's different from how you might have been trained or what you might have read or seen, or, you know, like have some flexibility in it. So, you know, I love teaching that level. I love teaching adults, and I've had a lot of fun and success teaching adult classes. I taught some at Steps in New York, and a few other places that I've been, and that's fun. I like to try to get people who were trained when they were young, and then just sort of, you know, they weren't going to go off and have a career, and they just abandoned it, but they were trained, you know, and that doesn't go away. And if you can get them to put some shoes back on and come back in and hold on to the bar, then they are like, oh, you know, this is something that I have, that I earned, you know, that I worked for and I earned, and I can pull it, you know, kind of pull it back out of the hat. And
Yeah.
need to see, you know, adult dancers kind of fall in love with it again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's so easy for adults or even young adults, like you said, who've taken off a little bit of time, you know, to just feel like they're out of shape and they can't do it anymore. But like you said, I think there's always like this innate quality, and even just your muscle memory, it's always there. It's just like you said, you kind of need to pull it back out and let it come to the surface again.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's really unique and special. Yeah. Well, I think now might be a great time to take a short break. All right, so we'll be back momentarily.
Here's a word from our sponsor.
Okay, so we're back. Michael, I have a question about George and Ginger. Can you tell us about like kind of what they do? Are they interested in dance at all? Are you trying to get them to dance? Would you like them to dance? Tell us a little bit about that.
The immediate story that comes to mind was taking George at, I don't know what, about age 8 or so, to probably his second full-length Nutcracker. And we would go over to North Carolina School of the Arts and see a really good one. Then we saw a local one because I had to go look at it, and I took him with me, and we came out in the parking lot. He's maybe 7, 8. Dad, swear to me, you will never make me watch another Nutcracker again, as long as I live. So I'm not going to force that on him. My daughter, my wife's last name is Rogers, and we named George. His middle name is her surname. His name is George Rogers Job. And then my mother-in-law said, "You two need to have a baby girl and name her Ginger Rogers." So we did. And my baby Ginger Rogers, maybe she'll be a dancer because she has beautiful feet, lines, hyperextended legs, and Daddy is going to train her.
Oh my gosh, I love that. And how old is Ginger?
She's 6.
Okay, so have you taken her?
She's just started her first tap ballet combo at a studio. So she's got it going on, but she's always known that Daddy did this unusual thing and that he was going to teach her. So she begs me to teach her all the time.
That's adorable.
Very sweet. And yeah, when you've got that facility like that, and as a parent that would be feel that it doesn't hurt to have that awareness.
There may be something ahead of her there. You'll be bored.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and Jennifer was a performer too, right? For a little while, Michael. So
she was. She grew up in her local ballet school and company, and got her initial degree or undergraduate degree at the University of North Carolina here in acting. So she went to New York and spent a couple of years in New York having a go of it. And at a certain point was inspired to return and get her master's in counseling here at Wake Forest. She got her master's, she got her PhD at Syracuse, and then was invited to come back to teach at Wake Forest, where she's been a professor since.
Yeah, that's amazing. So it just goes to show you that you've got kids, if they want to be in the arts, they've got 2 parents that they can learn from. That's
absolutely.
Amazing. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Wonderful.
We'll see how it goes. George likes baseball.
So baseball's okay too. Baseball.
I support that.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, just to really wrap things up today, Michael, we've loved learning so much about you, and there's kind of this ongoing question, issue, problem, whatever you might want to call it, I feel like, in the dance world and in our society. And I think this has emerged a little bit more, especially with the pandemic, but this idea of the arts and dance being kind of essential, or at least as dancers and artists, we see our work as essential, whereas not everyone else has that same particular viewpoint. What would you say for you is like the biggest thing of kind of like a positive outcome of dance for society, or why we should, as dancers and artists, be doing what we're doing, or why people should engage in the arts? Sorry, very loaded question, but hopefully you get the gist.
It is, but for me, I can boil it down like, and I'm gonna get a little emotional here. Like, because it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And I, why did you do what you did? Because it was beautiful to me. And I felt like I was part of something beautiful.
Mhm.
And that experience of sharing it and receiving this, in an audience after a great performance, the orchestra and the sets and the thing and everybody had this experience and you sharing it together, that the world was enriched. You knew that. There wasn't any question. You experienced that. The world around you was enriched by this work. I was talking to a guy here in town. I've been like really advocating for stuff to be better in my city, and going to the Arts Council and talking to them and going to this board and talking to them. And I went to a guy and he sort of heads a cultural development department of our city. And I was talking to him about what I thought they could do with their facility and how they might support the dance in our city. And we had this long conversation. Towards the end of it, he's like, what makes you think that Greensboro ought to have a ballet company? Like, why do you even think that? And the impression I got from that in that moment was that maybe he didn't think that. And I was kind of getting on his nerves.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just dumbfounded by that question from this guy in a powerful position. Like, what makes you think this city ought to have a ballet company? And, the same thing I just expressed to you, like I couldn't even say it, like, because it's so beautiful. It's so wonderful. These experiences people can have, and that's not happening. And I think it should happen in my town.
Yeah, I mean, why should only some places, some cities, like the big cities out there, why should only New York City or this and that get to experience something beautiful? Yeah.
I mean, it's just like a response to that kind of, I don't know, you just thought maybe we should do other things instead with our resources, but for me, I always thought it was important what I was doing. And it was hard, and you sacrifice, and you had to move from place to place, and relationships would suffer, and it was hard to do ordinary, things that ordinary people get to do, have a dog,
Right.
buy a house, any of that stuff, like I had mentioned earlier. But I always felt like it was really important to do this art.
Yeah, I think if people just realized and maybe learned a little bit more about just how important it is, then they might have it.
Yeah, because we miss it.
Yeah.
We feel it. We miss it. We miss, and Instagram doesn't do it. And little clips of people in their living room doing multiple pirouettes, it doesn't do it. What we need to have in that live shared experience.
Yeah.
And I have to say, in the theatrical setting, where it kind of works best, where you have control over things, and you have lighting, and you have a curtain, and you have wings. It's an old design. The proscenium setup, it's an old design, but it works and it's wonderful, and that's how 98% of the ballets ever created were designed to be shared that way across the front of that theater, and we miss it.
Mm-hmm.
And no matter what anybody says, remote is compromised. I'm going to say it, horribly compromised. And like we've got to build it back. I don't know.
Very well said.
Yeah,
I think
thanks.
you got very nice. Yeah. Well, thank you so much again, Michael. We really, really appreciate you being on today and sharing your experiences. And it was just nice to meet you as well, having heard about you through Hannah.
Yeah, your career is just incredible, and it's been really special for me to hear about it as well. Of course, I knew a little bit, and through my mom and through Jennifer and from you growing up, but it's really special to have this time with you. So we really, really appreciate that, and you're such an inspiration to us. So thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for being wonderful hosts. And I appreciate your voice out there doing what you're doing. Appreciate it very much. And keep dancing, both of you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Abundance. We appreciate your support. We hope to have PK'd your interest. Feel free to contact us at abundancepodcast5678@gmail.com and give us feedback on what you'd like to hear. That is abundance without parentheses. Go dance yourself silly. Bye for now.
A special thank you to Richard DiFiore for our lovely podcast tune and Matt Mellish for our cover art.